Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for March 27th, 2024. In the LaRouche Organization's daily intelligence briefing, my colleague Dennis Speed opened with a few lines from Percy Shelley's poem, The Masque of Anarchy. Shelley writes metaphorically of an encounter with, quote, murder, unquote, who he describes as wearing a mask which made him look, quote, very smooth, unquote. The masks provided a disguise, but one which Shelley could see through. And as Shelley did then, our job is to rip the masks off those who are corrupted members of today's establishment, to expose them. And this is an establishment which needs to be exposed because it refers to its murderous policies as a defense of a rules-based order. This ghastly masquerade is being systematically exposed, in large part due to the work that we're doing, as we on a daily basis provide an update on what they're saying, what they're doing, and what their intent is, and also organizing a movement to stop them. But we see this is growing as more people are speaking out. As the maskers are continuing their march of death, there are more examples in the last days of people with the courage to speak truth and to expose what they're doing. Now, let's start with the matter of the charges of genocide against the Palestinians conducted by Netanyahu and his Israel Defense Forces. There was a report presented to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in the last days by Francesca Albanese, who is the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. She produced a 25-page report titled The Anatomy of a Genocide, and it will be linked in the description section of today's update. Now, this report, among other things, accuses Israel of presenting a, quote, humanitarian camouflage to legitimize its genocidal violence in Gaza, unquote. It's an unapologetic view, which starts by acknowledging that Hamas committed barbaric acts, but said that such barbarism did not call for the response of genocide, which she said Israel is conducting. It's a thorough report, and it refers back to the International Court of Justice report and Israel's violations, continued violations of the provisional measures which were outlined in the ICJ report back in January, which were designed to, as the ICJ put it, stop the genocide underway. Now, Albanese concludes by referring to the UN Security Council resolution of the last days, which called for an immediate ceasefire and passed by a vote of 14-4 and 1 abstention, the one abstention being the United States, which still could not find in its policies the courage to stand up for an immediate ceasefire. Nevertheless, it passed. And Albanese said, quote, I implore member states to abide by their obligations, which starts with imposing an arms embargo and sanctions on Israel, and so ensure that the future does not continue to repeat itself, unquote. Now, how will the defenders of the so-called rules-based order in the Biden administration, such as the very smooth Antony Blinken, respond to this finding? Albanese wrote that they should have acted already when the ICJ first issued their report. Now she concludes, the time to act is now. And this is in the context of the commitment to never again will genocide be tolerated, which was part of the Genocide Convention of 1948. So I think this report is extremely important. It should be circulated. What it calls for is what we've been saying for a long time. The United States has the power to stop Netanyahu's commission of genocide, and that would be through threatening to withhold arms and aid to Israel if they continue this rampage against the Palestinian people. And now we have to make sure that it sticks, because Netanyahu has pledged that he will continue to do this, and Biden claims he's opposed to it. So let's see what the rules-based order defenders in the Biden administration choose to do. Now, speaking of the power of truth and dialogue, I want to refer you to an excellent interview with Diane Sare, the LaRouche independent candidate for the U.S. Senate from New York State, which was conducted by retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor. There'll be a link to this in the description section. Macgregor, along with people like Scott Ritter, Jeffrey Sachs, a number of others, Larry Johnson, have been very forthright and outspoken in their opposition to the warmongers in the Neocon establishment of NATO. But the fact that Macgregor took the time to interview Diane and post it on his website is extremely important, because it shows that the fight for truth is now one which is including many people who may disagree on certain aspects of the overall war, but who are committed to the idea that we must act now to stop the danger of this sliding into nuclear war. Now, we're also seeing on the other side the ghoulish neocons in their full glory calling for the breakup of Russia. Now, this is the unseemly cheering for the terror attack on Moscow. Now, we still don't know for sure whether there was a Ukrainian hand in it or not, whether it was just ISIS or ISIL that was involved. But the fact is, isn't it interesting that neocons who spearheaded the so-called war on terror to destroy the sovereign nations of Libya, Iraq, to try to destroy Syria, that they're now cheerleading the breakup of Russia? Now, among those at the forefront of this are people who are followers of the late geopolitician Zbigniew Brzezinski with the Jamestown Foundation. And it's been promoting for quite a while the breakup of Russia. Why? Well, the corporate sponsors of such think tanks are part of the cartel of raw material companies that want to get their hands on the vast raw materials of Russia. This goes back to the post-1991-92 breakup of the Soviet Union, when teams of bankers went in with corporate cartels to seize the raw material wealth of the former Soviet Union. Putin forced much of this to come back into the hands of Russians as opposed to the international global cartels. But the desire is still there to grab these raw materials. And how to do that? Well, support Islamic terrorists against Russia, support Ukrainian neo-Nazis against Russia, and so on. And so you can take a look at this, find the Jamestown Foundation, which is committed to this breakup of Russia for the purposes of seizing raw materials. Now, these are some of the topics I'll be discussing later today with the Schiller Institute founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Let me remind you that Mrs. LaRouche's drafting of 10 principles for the move to a new security and development order is at the center of a discussion process which is now being incorporating many of the anti-war groups to provide an actual principled foundation for the mobilization. Being against war is not enough. Creating a new order in which power is in the hands of the people of sovereign nations as opposed to the private interests of speculators and predators, that's the key to sustainable peace. And that's what the International Peace Coalition associated with the Schiller Institute and its founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, has been fighting for. So as you look at the documents that I've linked for today's description, keep in mind that this is the fight that requires everyone involved. As Albanese said, The time to act was then, when the initial International Court for Justice report came out. But since it wasn't taken advantage of then, now is the time to act. So hopefully you'll join me this afternoon when I speak with Helga Zepp-LaRouche.